Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Julia. I'm here with Shamim Samadi and Rael Klein. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started and diving into the content. The webinar will be recorded and sent out within 24 hours. An on-demand version will be in your inbox. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. There's a Q&A portion or the chat section. We will adjust those questions at the end of the webinar, so stay for the whole thing to get some additional insight that's not in the deck itself. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce both Shamim and Rael and have them introduce themselves, their role at the company, and the companies they represent. So Shamim?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. So my name is Shamim Samadi, co-founder, chief of product at Beeswax. For those of you that don't know, Beeswax is a very sort of flexible bidding system that allows customers to bring their own custom optimization, get unprecedented transparency and control, and we call our product offering a bidder as a service. Because we run that in the cloud and customers can, again, customize it in unprecedented ways.
And Rael, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Firstly, thanks Julia. It's great to be here. So I'm Rael Klein and I'm co-founder and CEO of MediaGamma. And MediaGamma is a spin out from one of the premier global centers of computing science, University College London, or UCL. Our team of data scientists use real-time machine learning and AI to help advertisers connect with the audiences, maximize budgets and ROI, and really optimize towards commercial goals. So we typically work with marketers, agencies, and DSPs to accelerate the goals in programmatic. And this can mean creating custom bidding algorithms or custom audience segments, all of which are very much aligned to business outcomes. These can be things like reduced customer acquisition costs or increased customer lifetime value.
Great, thanks. And we should note that MediaGamma is one of Beeswax's partners and part of the Beeswax Programmatic Cloud, which extends the services of Beeswax to expertise in the field of programmatic. So without further ado, we'll get right into the agenda. What we'll be speaking about within the webinar itself today is the technology you need to get started with custom optimization, how you can affect different types of optimization strategies within programmatic, everything from a crawl, walk, run effect, the benefits of custom optimization, building and scaling custom optimization solution, and selecting the right approach for the unique needs of your business. And then we'll have a section again for Q&A, so feel free to ask those questions throughout the webinar to either Shamim or Rael, and we'll address them at the end. So I thought we'd actually kick off the webinar and ask both Shamim and Rael, who are, for lack of a better word, experts in this field, why brands should really care about custom optimization. Why are we talking about this? Why are we sitting on this webinar here today?
Yeah, great. So this is Shamim. I'll start, and I think it's a great way to kick things off. Ultimately, why are we all taking valuable time out of our busy lives to sort of talk about this topic? And really, I think there's two dimensions to this. One is there's actually an interesting timing question around why custom optimization is both achievable today and it's become sort of part of the daily conversation in the programmatic world. One is because of the I would call it the data availability, which is that marketers, brands have been collecting tremendously valuable data over the past, decade plus, digital data, and have very robust data sets. Like ultimately, this has been what most folks have focused on over the last while, and now there's a richness and a robustness of data availability. And that's sort of a unique thing of the times. The other thing that's unique with the times is the advancements in tech, the underlying tech needed to deploy these sort of custom optimizations, both in terms of machine learning tech, whether it's AI tools and data intelligence tools, in addition to platforms like Beeswax that allow people to plug that in for a programmatic use case. So that's one dimension. I think the other dimension is, that's a function of the times that we're in. The second is around two things. One is, given that customers have this rich set of data, I think the more sophisticated ones are starting to think through how they can extract the maximum amount of value from that data. And ultimately, we believe that in the past, customers have had to really dumb down the data in order to extract any value from it, and sort of average it out. So just like a very simple example would be, if customers have per user level data on, user A is worth this much to me based off of their purchase history, user B is worth this different amount. What actually ends up happening today is, customers kind of put them into a couple of user segments, high value users and lower value users, and maybe change their bidding strategies based off of those segments of users. But we think of that as averaging it out. So you have tens of thousands or hundreds or millions of users in each of those segments, and you're treating them all as the same. And you're just leaving a ton of value on the table. And that's just one example, right? The ultimate, but ultimately this sort of, we're interested in this de-averaging, so unaveraging the things and treating each individual opportunity as its own opportunity to optimize. And the second, I think that's really important is just in this marketplace that we're in, creating any form of competitive edge, I think, is really the story for the next few years. Programmatic is here to stay. It's growing, and now all customers have tremendous amounts of data. And so how are customers going to create that next stage of competitive edge relative to their competitors? We believe one of the primary ways is through companies investing in custom optimization. Again, the maximum value out of the data that we already have.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my side, firstly, very much agree with what Shamim's saying there around the timing of the various pieces of the technology, but just honing in a bit more on the timing, especially from sort of a data science or AI side of things. The timing is fantastic right now. So there's been a lot of emphasis in the last few years on the data and the tech, but really in terms of best practices on how to actually make it, convert those into models and scale that, and the learnings from that and iterate. That, I would say, really in the last 12 months has been quite big breakthroughs on that side. And so it becomes a lot easier to implement and scale as a result of that. So, this idea of de-averaging, getting really granular with the data and personalized with the data is now actually doable at scale from sort of the model building side, and it can really have direct results on revenues or customer acquisition and things like that. So definitely the timing is the major one I want to emphasize.
Thanks, Rael. And now we're going to hand it over to Shamim.
So I'll go through a few things. So starting off with the technology and the resources one needs in order to even start to think about tackling this problem of custom optimization. So, first and foremost is the underlying data. This is what we believe brands are already great at, capturing that data, making sure that data is clean and usable. And those are not trivial tasks, but it all starts with the data. If you don't have the data, then there's not much value you can extract from it, right? Second is the data science function, right? Which is, as we'll talk about in more detail, could be in-house data science. So these could be on staff. It could, in some cases, it could be even analysts who can express models with simpler versions of optimization, which we'll get into, one of which is we call bid modifiers. But ultimately, they're the people who are going to be doing this work. And given the way the ecosystem has evolved, and given the amount of demand there is for data science and custom optimization, there are options both where it's in-house and it can be, and where brands can work with key partners like Media Gamma and others who've built this sort of expertise. So this ecosystem of data science, not only as a technology, but the people function of it is emerging just based off of, frankly, the need and the appetite for it. And then lastly, on the technology side, we talk about this briefly, but both the machine learning and data science tech has evolved in such a way where it's much more accessible, but also bidding platforms like Beeswax, which make it easier for customers to make those optimizations a reality in a biddable world, are two both sort of important trends in tech. And so I'll go into that second one, which is how platforms like Beeswax help solve part of the technical problem for custom optimization. So this is a sort of diagram that explains a little bit of what platforms like Beeswax can do in this to help sort of solve this problem. So if you break the problem down into sort of the data science problem, which Rail will talk about more later, the second part of the problem is how do I make my optimization sort of, how can I plug it into this real-time biddable environment? And so we break that problem down into a few things. So first customers need to access all the supply out there that is biddable, right? So this is millions of queries per second of auctions, cross-device, cross-format, and first and foremost, you need to access that. Otherwise, you have access to limited supply, and you can only extract so much value out of your optimization. So with Beeswax, we plug into all of these exchanges, have huge scale, and can furthermore filter and customize that traffic to exactly what the customer wants. Second, once you have access to the traffic, the second question you need to answer is, do I want to bid on this given auction, right? And the do I want to bid is answered through complex targeting and creative matching and frequency cap, budget, et cetera. These are these are complex technical engineering problems when done at high scale that need to be very reliable, that need to sort of keep up with all the changes in the RTB ecosystem, including new targetable fields, et cetera. And so with Beeswax, we give customers this solution out of the box, right? Like customers can express all of this complex targeting and business rules within the platform, and we will answer the question, do you want to bid on this given auction, right? And then third is how much do I want to bid for this auction? Once I've decided I want to bid, what is the price, right? And with Beeswax, and I'll go through this in more detail, one of the options is plugging in real-time custom optimization. So whether you build it yourself or you use a partner, you could plug in your own real-time custom optimization to bid on every single auction uniquely based off of complex bidding strategies. So this is sort of, if you're going to do true custom optimization, this is what Beeswax would solve, and this is how you can plug in your custom opt into the stack. Now peeling the onion back a little bit, because there's different flavors of optimization, right? There's a spectrum here. So going from sort of least sort of flexible and sophisticated to most sophisticated on the left, I'll just sort of talk through this. We have sort of out-of-the-box optimization first, then bid modifiers, and then full custom opt. So with out-of-the-box optimization, which we have available through the Beeswax platform, and other DSPs have this option as well. The value is, you have optimization on day one. There's, you don't have to do a ton of work, but there's a lot of downsides to it, including it's one size fits all. So if you want to do anything custom, anything different, or bring your data in any real meaningful way, it becomes, challenging and right? But the value of the course is just as easy you can get started. The second option is with bid modifiers, which gives you a big boost in terms of control. And the way that this works is, you could run offline models which determine, based on certain criteria, how you want to modify your bid price. So you may learn that on certain times of the day, or on certain apps or domains, or even individual users, that you want to boost your bid price up or down by some factor. So So you could use bid modifiers to run those offline models, upload that data into Beeswax, and we'll do the bid modification for you in our system. So that's a big upgrade in terms of control. The downside relative to custom opt is that, you know, it's offline, it's manual, and it's somewhat limited in the number of unique keys that you can optimize for it. So if you wanted to do something really complicated like user ID and domain and exchange combination, and for every unique combination of those three, you want it to have a bit different bid price, that data set, you know, blows up in size, and you probably want to use custom optimization. And the last one is true custom opt, which is what we're digging into here, where customers can optimize towards any KPI, use any data that's available on the OpenRTB request, and truly bid per impression using, you know, any strategy. It's really sort of up to the customer's creativity. And in this model, the intelligence and the code lives in the customer's cloud, and you know, sort of there's no limits on the different strategies that you can do here. The downside is, you know, it's more effort. It takes time and effort to build these things, and there's data science resources needed to execute on it. Yeah, and so and sort of summarized here, you, as a buyer, I think it's important to think through those different options. Sometimes an out-of-the-box optimization is appropriate, and on Beeswax you have that option. Sometimes a bid modifier is appropriate if you want to do something a bit more sophisticated. And then ultimately, if you want ultimate control, a bidding agent may be appropriate. But it really does depend on what you want to accomplish. Not all customers need a bidding agent. So it really is important to first answer, like, what do I want to optimize towards, and what product or feature can best get me there. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Rael, who will go deeper into custom optimization.
And we'll answer questions. I see some questions coming through, which is great. We'll answer those questions at the end of Rael's portion here.
Great, thanks, Shamim. So from my point of view, you know, what is needed to actually get started with a custom optimization model, and I guess just some high-level thoughts around this. So the first one is that, you know, we think it certainly requires a strategic approach, and really expectations need to be set around the return on investment on this in terms of the time frame and what can actually be expected in that time frame. So typically for us, we would say that it's a 6-month commitment before you start actually seeing, you know, the results that are going to move the needle and carry on improving off the back of that. So it requires quite a bit of patience, and it will require typically C-level buy-in, or at least VP digital. And really these pieces are around aligning the strategy, the resources, the tech, and the incentives of everyone involved to set it up for success. And there's certainly been some great webinars that Beeswax have done over the last few months on this aspect of it. So I'm not really going to focus on that so much over here. But flipping it around in terms of the opportunities, I mean, firstly, you know, programmatic itself is in programmatic channels, the opportunity is just growing bigger and bigger every day, really. And whether it's established channels like desktop or mobile, but also moving into some things that are far more nascent around out of home or television, for that instance, the opportunity is just growing. And so the you know, the incentive to actually go and dive into the custom opportunity becomes that much more powerful. There's definitely a lot of hard problems to solve that can directly impact the business goals. So whether these are around attribution or traffic quality, understanding user behavior in a lot more detail, these are very much can be tied to business outcomes around customer acquisition or lifetime values, and, you know, even use cases beyond strictly programmatic, and I can get to those as well. The second point there, which is the programmatic environment is quite unique from a model building point of view. So typically anything AI and machine learning related requires vast amounts of data, and programmatic has that in spades. And so these huge data sets And crucially, there's a quick and quantifiable feedback loop that you can actually tie to a business outcome. So when you want to experiment with a new model or a series of models, you can quite quickly find out whether they're working and how much they're working by. If you had to take other, let's say, a completely unrelated problem, in healthcare, you can wait months to see whether your algorithm has actually moved the needle at all. So programmatic is quite unique in that way. And the third point there is starting off in programmatic can be a beachhead to scale other use cases across the organization. So that's because of the data sets and the quick feedback loop, it's often a really good place to start on the custom optimization side. But you can use the learnings in the programmatic environment either for other marketing channels, or we're starting to see those insights being used in even non-marketing channels. Just if you're understanding your customers' behavior a lot better, that can inform other use cases around personalization of cross-selling or upselling, for instance. So in terms of how we would break down the problem here, there are really three major areas. And the first one is around reviewing the data policies. This is twofold. This has got to do with obviously your customer, but also in terms of the data sources or the ad tech vendors. The second part is making the data actionable. And this is an absolutely critical element. And I'd say probably the number one failure for these projects to not work out is something has gone wrong in this step here around making the data actionable. At the end of the day, you can have the best data scientists and as many resources as you want, but if it's not set up correctly and made actionable, then you're destined to fail. The third part about it is knowing how to select the right AI partner or how to build an in-house team. And so these are just going through some of the best practices that if you're either doing it yourself or at least some quite detailed questions to ask an AI partner on how they would go about these best practices. So starting with the first one, which is reviewing the data policies, twofold in terms of the relationship you have with your customers, but also the ad tech vendors. So in the relationship with your customers, it's not to say that you have to have all of this in place, but you certainly want to be working towards something like this, which is you really want the customers to be able to interact across connected devices, everything from web browsers to mobile phones, knowing that you're using the data in a transparent way, and obviously compliant with any regulation. So here in Europe, of course, on the GDPR side, but similar things might pop up in other geographies as well. So just being very clear about who owns the data, who else has access to it, and the customer's expectations around it. The second aspect of that is the relationship with the vendors. So again, it's need to be very clear around the data ownership, who else has access to it, but also something we've seen, which is really the transferability of the data. So not all DMPs or I guess even DSPs would even allow firstly access to log level data sets that could just be aggregated reports, and you have to pay a big fee to get anything beyond that. And secondly, it might be difficult to even export that data if you want to go and build custom optimization. So it's really making sure that you have access to the data at a log level. And of course, that's what Beeswax does. So that's a fantastic starting point there. In terms of making the data actionable, really there are two components here. Number one is establishing a common identifier, and then the data prep side, which although could be quite a dull topic, is probably the most important one. But starting with the common identifier, this is really a starting point. So again, with the explosion of devices, digital identity typically is quite fragmented. It happened to me last week where I just received an offer from my bank for a product I already own. We've all kind of had a similar experience there, but creating a unified view of the customer is really a starting point. And this, ideally, you want this to be across all different channels. So if it's paid channels, online, connected TV, for instance, or owned, so this is physical stores or websites, could even be call centers, earned channels such as social media. So that's, again, certainly don't have to have all of these in place at all to begin custom optimizations, but it should be in the thinking and a goal to work towards. in terms of the second part and the data preparation, so this is crucial. You know, at the end of the day, AI can make sense of all the data and extracts insights from it, but it really is working from a premise that the data is in a suitable format. This is a pretty big topic, and I'm going to, I guess, keep it quite brief, but AI is such a data-hungry process. And what do I mean by the data? So examples of this could be auction logs, its impressions, it can be first-party data sets such as CRM data, external data sets. We've been, you know, for instance, we can work with real-time weather information or DMP segments. And the goal here is to normalize the data, make it comparable, and connect it to the unified view of the customer. And once that's done, you're then in a position to start aligning the AI-driven decisions to the business outcomes. Ideally, you want to be doing this, a goal to do this in real time, but unless this is done, you're not really ready to go and do the custom optimizations. And just naming a few of the issues you might face along the way, certainly sparse data or missing data is a particular problem. If something you want to optimize towards is quite a rare event, you might not have enough of them to actually go build a really good model. You can run into the opposite problem where you've actually got too much data and it becomes too expensive to even keep and save it and reuse it. So how do you sample the data? How do you synchronize the update frequency across all the data sources? So yeah, I mean, these are just some of the issues that you would face along the way. Just because you have access to a large data set doesn't mean that it's particularly useful. Certainly some data sets are more useful than others. The trick is to figure that out, which ones are more useful than the others. You know, everyone's, I guess, every sort of vendor is claiming that their data has unique properties or unique insights, so it can be quite hard to navigate, to sort through what's valuable and what isn't. And I'd say there's no real point in hiring data scientists to go and build models until this infrastructure is in place. At the end of the day, you don't want to pay you know, highly sort of specialized data scientists to go and do data preparation. So this needs to be in place before you can think about building the custom algorithms, really. So moving on to the third one, which is knowing how to select the right AI partner or how to build an in-house team. Again, these are more sort of some best practice type principles here, or at least questions you should be asking of an AI partner. So with the policies, the data assets, and the pipes in place, the stage is set now to introduce the custom model building and really tie that to your commercial goals. And just 4 points I want to cover here. The first one being, don't underestimate the engineering resources required for scaled AI. So a couple of things on this. It's especially important in programmatic. There's quite a unique aspect to programmatic due to two issues. The first one being the size of the data sets that you're getting on a daily basis or hourly or by minute or whatever it is truly huge. And so you need quite specialized engineering resources to be able to cope with that. Also, when you're actually deploying the model to respond to the bid request and say, hey, I want to bid this price, you're operating in what's called, you know, high throughput and low latency environment. So you're having to make tens or hundreds of thousands of decisions a second and very, very low latencies. And so the infrastructure needed to do that is quite specialized. And if you're doing it from a custom model point of view, the engineering can be quite different to how you would think about doing it in a programmatic environment, or frankly, almost any other environment as well. And what you want to be focusing on from the infrastructure point of view is to accommodate what we call kind of a model factory, right? You want to be iterating and building multiple models at the same time, a framework to quickly evaluate these things and iterate on them. So instead of just focusing on one problem with, you know, a very sophisticated model, you want to be exploring 2 to 3 at the same time and quite quickly assessing which ones are working and which ones are not, and focusing on those that are working. So that's the first one. The second one, I guess, is related, but it's worth bearing out as well as a separate point. And this is the focus on automation. So a large part of the value proposition of AI is actually on the automation side of it. So not only are you dealing with, let's say, data sets and at a level of complexity that's beyond any human to actually act on, but it can automate those processes as well. And so really from the very beginning, you need to be focusing on how do I automate the process. It certainly does not mean taking humans out of the decision making, but it's setting up the automation of how do I build, 2 to 3 models pretty quickly, and how do I evaluate them quite quickly. So humans are certainly still involved in that process. So things you want to be focusing on are metrics around, how long does it take to get to my first model? How quick does it take to explore the models or the data? Those sorts of metrics I think are quite useful in thinking about the engineering component. Although if I had to actually pick one from the slide, it's the third one. So connect AI experts to the business outcomes. So this I think is absolutely critical, and in our experience, a major reason why projects like this are difficult or don't work out. So a few things to say about this. Firstly, as a, I guess, very general comment, the machine learning experts or the data scientists don't tend to build their models with a commercial objective in mind. So because I guess its roots are quite sort of academic, the focus tends to be on a statistical measure or something as the value of the model, instead of something like a campaign ROI or return on ad spend or reduction in customer acquisition costs. So really bridging that gap is absolutely critical, and whether that's down to an individual or a few individuals, or our approach is actually taking the other extreme, which is every single one of our data scientists has domain expertise. They know how to set up and run an ad campaign from an ad ops point of view. And so our models from the very beginning are not just about some formula or statistical measure, but they've front and center about campaign ROI or whatever our customer is looking to optimize towards. So this can help in another way, which is if something is not performing, instead of looking straight into the data or the model building process to try and debug that, if you've actually got domain expertise and say almost ad ops expertise as a data scientist, you can short circuit the whole sort of debugging process, and quite often it will end up being something around an issue with campaign setup, for instance, and it's not necessarily an issue with the data or the model. So I think really having the data scientists, the people actually building the models, really so closely connected to the business outcome there, and the domain expertise goes a very, very long way. The last one there, start with very narrow problems and focus on basic models. So again, there's a tendency to just focus on very sophisticated models, which can take longer to learn from, longer to deploy, all those sorts of things, and almost go and tune those models. Whereas what you should be doing in the very beginning is building something incredibly basic. We've seen really good results in return on ad spend just from building very, very basic models, and you can always go and iterate and scale those out and introduce more sophisticated models, I guess. But to move the needle certainly does not equate with starting off with a very sophisticated model. So keep it very, very narrow, almost per line item is what we do, and start off with something simple that you can get out in a very short space of time, assess the results, and iterate from there. We've certainly worked on a whole bunch of different use cases in terms of what custom algorithms optimizations would be. So these can be things around retention rates, even purchases. It's certainly special circumstances around long lag times until conversions, or taking into account offline conversions of events, provided that the data is available to do that. So I hope that gives a good idea of some general principles that definitely starting to emerge, not just within sort of the model building world, but certainly applied to programmatic as well as a good starting point. So I hope that's been useful.
Thanks, Rael. Very good content so far. We do have a few questions that are coming in here. So I will ask them to both, Rael and Shamim. I also want to make their emails available. So should you have any questions specifically around custom optimization or their businesses, feel free to reach out to them with those questions. So first question in, does custom optimization support customer provided machine learning AI models? If so, what standard model representations are supported?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way that it works in the Beeswax world is that instead of shipping the ML model to Beeswax in a particular language or format, and having us sort of run the model in our cloud, we provide a much more flexible option where we'll call out to customers in real time, and they could run their models. They could, build that code in whatever language they want, use whatever frameworks they want, and ultimately it's just an API. It's a real-time HTTP API where we'll make a call out with the auction with every attribute, including the user, everything that's on the OpenRTB request, and then we just expect a response back within 10 milliseconds. And so that's obviously the most flexible option and doesn't tie you into any particular framework, and ultimately also gives you the customer that data and the model, et cetera, lives in your systems and in your cloud, for sort of ownership purposes is also valuable. And
then what's the response speed time?
Yeah, so 10 milliseconds end to end. Yeah, so what that means, so in order to hit 10 milliseconds, we have many, I would say most of our customers have custom optimization plugged into our system. So in order to achieve that latency, what it requires is that customers co-locate their endpoints in AWS generally, although we can do things outside of AWS in the same regions that we're in, so that latency requirement can be met.
Great. Question for Rael. Why does it take a 6-month commitment for the needle to start moving? We spoke a little bit about time and resources needed for the system to be fully functioning or at its highest performing. Can you go a little bit into that deep level of detail?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not 6 months for the needle to start moving. It's more about 6 months for to see the ROI on the project, really. So I mean, the needle certainly starts moving a long time before that. But it's got to do with a lot of it's the sort of organizational piece around aligning sort of strategy incentives, picking the campaigns, making sure that the campaigns that you're choosing, at least to begin with, are going to be, frankly, are going to be around for a while. At the end of the day, the machine learning can be quite sensitive. It's only as good as the data that it's trained on. So for instance, if you're picking a candidate campaign, but after 3 days, the campaign changes, things like that, then that can certainly affect the model building process. So you want to pick a sort of stable type campaign to go and do that. Also, when you want to introduce more sophisticated models or new data sources, that's an iterative process as well. We're not going to start off, for instance, by introducing 3 different first-party data sets and real-time weather information. You want to introduce these things slowly over time to measure the impacts, to isolate the variables, things like that. So that's quite a sort of resource-intensive process. But at the end of the day, the ROI is absolutely justified, and further beyond that, I mean the results are compounding. So you'll get far beyond that in the ROI.
Great, thanks, Rael. Another question for Beeswax coming in. Can customers update the line item settings programmatically, like bid and daily budget, on an existing Beeswax campaign? If yes, what are the options to perform updates programmatically? Yeah,
so great question. So everything, we think of, there's sort of 2 sets of APIs. One set of APIs are on campaign management, and you could see all these APIs if you go to docs.beeswax.com. Very well documented. But there's a REST API where you could update anything literally anything in the campaign management workflow, including any targeting or budget or frequency cap or anything, any setting really. We built our campaign management on the same API we give our customers access to, so customers have access to the whole thing. And then secondly, and those are our RESTful APIs. And then the second set of APIs are the real-time ones. So while you can update your bid price via the REST API, in order to do it in real time per impression, you'd want to use our real-time API, which is, we call it our sort of custom bidding agent, is the way to do it. There's also another question, which I could relates to our third API. So the question was around, does Beeswax support pre-bid custom data enhancement to feed into custom op? So this question is around, what if you have data, custom data that you want to sort of feed in before you bid, and use that data to as an input to your model, right, to change the bid price. And the answer is yes, we do have this, and this is our third API, which we call the data augmenter, which ultimately works in the same way, in the sense that it's a real-time API, a 10 millisecond timeout. We make a real-time call out with the full request again, so everything that's available from the exchange, and we expect back segment key values that can then be used downstream by your optimization. So we have many customers using this as well. So that sort of combination of like pre-bid data augmentation, where you can add custom data, and then real-time bid price optimization in the custom bidding agent can be a really powerful combination.
Great. A question for you, Rail. Can custom optimization receive a LiveRamp ID as one of its input on a pre-bid basis? So we just addressed the pre-bid segment here, but I assume it can be used within the custom optimization algorithm as well, right?
Yeah, and this is probably more of a question for Beeswax, I think. So the ID, so the user ID that is that can be keyed off of in your optimization. So there's a couple of things. It could be the Beeswax cookie ID, the mobile device ID. And we have this this feature that we call hosted match tables, where it could be your own customers, your own ID space. So if you have your own cookie space, we can give you back your ID in the request, and you could key off of that. With LiveRamp, while we have the integration with LiveRamp, and while we could technically send the LiveRamp identity link ID, we don't today. But if that is important and useful, we would be open to doing that.
Great. Okay, so one other question here.
Yeah, so the question is, if customers have to make optimizations on a daily basis, it requires them to get previous day's data completely, right? So, ultimately, like, how long does it take to deliver the data in order to build your optimization? So the answer to that, so through the Beeswax platform, sort of a couple things. We'll give customers access to win data. So both, actually, we'll give access to auction, bid, and win data in a raw form in near real time. So with auction and bid data, it's delayed by a couple of minutes. With win data, so that's impressions, conversions, clicks, etc., we can deliver that in real time. So as soon as it hits our servers, we could write it to an endpoint or a Kinesis stream. The only time there's a delay is if you want aggregated reporting. So if you want aggregated wins, joined to the bid, those are delayed by 2 hours. So there's a 2-hour delay in aggregated data.
Great. Love to see these questions coming in. Rail, can you provide an example of custom optimization algorithm applied to unique first-party data set, either by brand or by vertical, or just a unique example that you've seen?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, I mean, things that we've done, I'll use by vertical. So let's take a gaming company, a mobile gaming company, and the type of campaign is a customer acquisition type campaign. Well, there are actually two cases. There's one for a new game launch, but there's also one for an existing game. But I guess the principles would be the same there. So the first party data sets would be things like, here's a list of people that have already downloaded and used our game. They might have spent different brackets of money over a period of time. So let's say high lifetime value users. Can you use this information to find similar people like that and within the bid stream? And when you do, obviously we would know to bid a lot higher. So there might be cases where we know certain apps or certain types of user behavior are correlated with those high lifetime value users, and when we see something similar like that in the actual bid stream, then of course that changes our calculation and how much we're prepared to pay to win that particular auction. So I think that's quite a nice use of first party data sets.
Great. And Shamim, I think we had one from an earlier webinar about playable ads. That was interesting. First party data.
Yeah. So another example, and this is a real example of a customer using the Beeswax platform where they run a playable ad format. So these are mobile interstitial ad units, which will show a preview, will be a playable version of the mobile game, like the first level, sort of a simple version of the first level where the user can play with the game in an ad unit. And this partner in particular realized that most other technology platforms, if not all, are optimizing towards clicks or some other metric, whereas they learned that user engagement with the ad unit is really what is predictive of conversion, right? So if the user plays with the ad for n number of seconds, they're likely to convert. So they're using that sort of, call that first party data, unique data, which is optimizing towards an engagement, which they found is predictable of downstream purchase behavior. And that sort of thing, that's a great example of something that you must build custom opt for that, because only you, the buyer, has that data insight and can optimize towards that KPI.
Another question coming in, does Beeswax allow setting daily budget by dollar amount only or by number of impression caps per day?
Yeah, we offer both. So all of our budgets, both at the campaign and the line item level, expressed in dollars or impressions. Very flexible.
Great. One other question, and then any other questions, feel free to email them. But Galen is a question for Media Gamma. It looks like you assist with lookalike modeling for B2B use cases. Would you start with an email address and do you do something like compare across third-party data sets to bring back similar, or how does your approach work?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we would need what we call a seed data set, something like a unique identifier. It could be a mobile ID, I guess could be an email address, etc. And then we would collect what we call events associated with this behavior. So we could pick up these events from the bid stream or from impressions, etc. And we start to get a picture of the behavior over time. And then we can model essentially the non-seed users, so everyone else, let's say in the environment, how close they are to that particular seed user with a probability. I mean, I can go into a lot more detail on this, but we probably don't have time for that. But really what you want to be doing is testing how accurate your predictions are in the first place. So you could, if you're wanting to estimate, let's say, demographic details, age or gender, you can have a seed data set, break that into two, train a model on the first half, and then predict out on that second half. And you can obviously mark your homework and see how accurate you are. Once you're happy with the accuracy, you can apply that model to everyone else that you don't know anything about. That's one way of doing that. But yeah, feel free to, I'm happy to follow up this conversation as well to go in more detail on that.
Great. So yeah, both Shamim and Rail's email address is on the screen right now. Feel free to follow up with them should you have additional questions. Thank you for participating. It makes the webinar a lot more bearable when we have questions to be answered from people in real time. Thank you for attending today. It was really great content. Thank you, Rail. This is really insightful, and we look forward to continuing to partner together and servicing the customers that joined on today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.